Indian forces have just hit a nuclear storage facility deep inside of Pakistan. May 10th could have genuinely been the day a nuclear war started. And yet, hardly anyone around the globe realizes how insanely close we just came to World War III.
We have some breaking news. Pakistan's
Prime Minister has accused India of igniting an inferno with the missiles it launched at his country overnight.
Relations between India and Pakistan, two nuclear powers, have long been tense. Both countries have blamed each other for the violence since militants killed Indian tourists last month in Indian-administered Kashmir.
It's the worst confrontation between the two nuclear-armed neighbors in decades.
Shehbaz Sharif said India had made a grave mistake for which it will now have to pay the price.
Right now, nearly every major global power is panicking. America, Russia, China, the European Union, you name it. Everyone is losing sleep. This is exactly why the USA got involved to push for a ceasefire. According to reports, the USA received some troubling information where this war was heading. Now, they didn't disclose what this troubling information was, but we think we can all guess. But first, let's quickly rewind a bit, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. On April 22nd, Pakistani terrorists carried out a brutal attack on India. 15 days later, on May 7th, India retaliated with precise surgical strikes that utterly decimated major terrorist camps hidden deep inside Pakistani territory. India even let Pakistan know this strike was not on Pakistani civilians or military, but just on known terrorist camps. But Pakistan decided to retaliate and start a full-on war. Over the next 2 days, they launched over 500 drones and hundreds of missiles towards 36 Indian cities. Luckily, most of the threat was successfully intercepted, but the intent of Pakistan was clear, an undeniable act of war. So, late on May 9th, bleeding into the early hours of May 10th, India unleashed a retaliation of its own. In just 3 hours, Indian forces launched several missiles, a long-range ramjet supersonic cruise missile, striking 11 military air bases across all 4 Pakistani provinces. Some of these targets were crucial ammunition depots, while bases like Sargodha and Bolari housed frontline F-16s and JF-17 fighter jets. In a single night, Pakistan lost roughly 20% of its air force infrastructure. In their official briefing afterwards, Indian officials emphasized these strikes were still measured, clearly warning Pakistan they were prepared to target more than half of the remaining infrastructure if tensions escalated further. Perhaps most alarming for Pakistan is the complete failure of its air defense network, built almost entirely from Chinese imports. Over the past decade alone, Pakistan has invested tens of billions of dollars into building a modernized military, with over 80% of its entire arsenal sourced directly from Beijing. This includes the advanced HQ-9 surface-to-air missiles, or SAM, systems, costing roughly $300 million per battery. China markets these systems as equivalent to Russia's powerful S-300, capable of simultaneously tracking and engaging multiple aerial threats at ranges of up to 200 kilometers and altitudes reaching 27 kilometers. Pakistan also acquired multiple units of the sophisticated YLC-8B long-range surveillance radars, priced around $50 million each. China proudly claimed that these radars are capable of monitoring hundreds of airborne targets simultaneously, with a detection range exceeding 450 kilometers. However, in actual combat conditions, the radars detected absolutely nothing. Indian missiles and drones flew undetected and hit every single target. Beyond just these 2 systems, Pakistan's inventory includes several other Chinese-made defenses, like LY-80 missile batteries, FM-90 air defense systems, and cutting-edge surveillance drones. Still, none of them work like they're supposed to. Today, Pakistani forces are reduced to manually firing anti-aircraft guns randomly into the sky, hoping to strike down Indian drones. This is when Pakistan's nukes come into play. Now, this video is definitely not advertiser-friendly according to the YouTube algorithm, and this is why we need your help. YouTube has a habit of restricting videos that talk about war, but this is the reality of the world we live in. So, if you can do us a big favor and hit that like and subscribe button down below, it helps the video out tremendously. We appreciate you. So, when everything else fails, the one thing Pakistan expects it can count on is its nuclear arsenal. Now, if you were in Pakistan's shoes, you'd go to extraordinary lengths to fortify and safeguard this prized possession, right? Well, Pakistan did exactly that. Or at least they thought they did. But as we've already seen, none of their Chinese-made defense systems actually worked when put to the test. And that catastrophic failure was brutally exposed on May 10th, when India directly targeted the Nur Khan base in Rawalpindi. This base is literally the nerve center of Pakistan's Air Mobility Command. It's home to critical assets, including a significant portion of Pakistan's nuclear warhead stockpile, Saab Iri airborne early warning aircraft, vital C-130 Hercules transporters, and strategic IL-78 aerial refueling tankers. Despite its supposed invincibility, Nurkan base was hit directly by multiple precision-guided Indian missiles. Almost immediately, panic spread like wildfire through Pakistan's military ranks. Nobody knew exactly how deep the damage ran, or how many nuclear warheads, if any, had been compromised or destroyed. See, what most people don't realize is that India and Pakistan don't usually keep their nuclear warheads armed and ready to fire at all times. Instead, their nuclear warheads are stored separately. Warheads are kept away from missiles and delivery systems. If war actually breaks out, it takes some time to assemble these warheads, mount them onto missiles, and then deploy them. On the other hand, countries like the United States and Russia keep many of their nuclear weapons fully assembled, armed, and ready to launch immediately, literally at a moment's notice. But why does this matter? Well, because it explains exactly what India was up to when they hit Nurkan base in the Karana Hills. India knew precisely where Pakistan kept its nuclear warheads, which in itself is a massive intelligence disaster for Pakistan. That single fact alone sent a terrifying message straight to Islamabad. Pakistan immediately panicked as they realized their ultimate backup plan, their nuclear arsenal, could literally go up in smoke at any moment. That's why they practically rushed to the United States, begging America to jump in immediately and force India into a ceasefire. Now, here's the funny part. Just 2 days earlier, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, was live on Fox News, saying this whole India-Pakistan mess was, and I quote, fundamentally none of our business. Yet, suddenly, barely 48 hours later, America found itself right in the middle of one of the most dangerous nuclear standoffs in decades. Also, the speed at which America went from completely hands-off to deeply involved feels strangely quick, almost suspiciously fast. Did Pakistan genuinely panic that badly and beg America to intervene? Or was there maybe some subtle blackmail hinting at a nuclear chaos if they didn't intervene? After all, desperation has a way of pushing nations into drastic, even reckless decisions. We'll break this down in just a moment, but first, did you know that this isn't the first time America has stepped in and narrowly prevented a nuclear war between India and Pakistan? Back in 1999, during the famous Kargil War, US President Bill Clinton intervened directly between India and Pakistan. And there's a very good reason why he did this. Just 1 year earlier, in 1998, both India and Pakistan shocked the world by publicly testing nuclear weapons, officially becoming nuclear powers. That changed everything. Suddenly, any conflict between these two neighbors could turn catastrophic. The Kargil conflict started when Pakistani soldiers secretly infiltrated high-altitude Indian territory in Kashmir. Initially, India thought they were fighting a small-scale insurgency, but quickly realized the attackers were actually Pakistani military units. Heavy fighting erupted, and the situation escalated quickly. Clinton immediately saw how dangerous this was. To stop this nightmare scenario, Clinton personally stepped in and invited Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to Washington for emergency talks, directly pressuring Pakistan to withdraw its troops from Indian territory in Kargil. After intense negotiations, Sharif agreed, and Pakistan ultimately pulled back its forces, effectively ending the Kargil War. Fast forward to right now, and President Donald Trump is pretty much doing the same. Overnight, he quickly stepped in to broker yet another ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And in classic Trump style, before either country could even announce it themselves, he went ahead and publicly declared the ceasefire and branded himself the hero who stopped a war. But guess what? The ceasefire didn't even last more than 3 hours. Pakistan immediately violated it by launching intense shelling and sending hundreds of suicide drones straight into Indian territory. Now the problem is, during the ceasefire negotiations, India officials explicitly warned Pakistan if they fired even a single bullet, launched another drone, or made any provocation move at all, India's response would be swift, devastating, and unforgettable. And honestly, by the time you're watching this, India might have already acted on that threat. And if that's the case, trust me, you're going to want to hit subscribe right now because another video is already on the way. Now, coming back to the whole blackmail part, let me start by saying that Pakistan is in absolutely no position to blackmail anyone right now, especially not the United States. Their economy is already crumbling. Their military infrastructure is getting wiped out day by day, and their global credibility is basically at zero. But they still have one bargaining chip, the one and only fear factor they have, which is the threat of nuclear warheads somehow falling into the wrong hands. Realistically, here's what could have happened. Pakistan urgently reached out to the Trump administration, practically begging America to step in and stop India's attacks. They likely argued that if India continued striking their air bases and key military installations, the Pakistani armed forces would soon become completely unable to safeguard even their nuclear stockpiles. In other words, Pakistan probably warned that if things got any worse, if their own military was genuinely crippled, there was a terrifying risk that their nuclear weapons could fall directly into the hands of terrorist groups. Given the groups like the Taliban and the TTP have practically operated side by side with Pakistan for decades, the United States took Pakistan's threat very seriously. Washington rapidly moved to coordinate urgent communication between India and Pakistan, trying to calm things down and secure an immediate ceasefire. At this point, the public had no clue what was really going on. But right after the Indian airstrikes, Pakistani media reported that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had called for an emergency meeting of the National Command Authority, or the NCA. This group is responsible for managing Pakistan's nuclear arsenal. And that's when people started connecting the dots and realizing just how serious things had actually gotten. After the NCA meeting, Pakistan's Director of General Military Operations, DGMO, quickly reached out to his Indian counterpart, urgently requesting an immediate ceasefire. Around the same time, senior American leaders, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Senator Marco Rubio, jumped in too. They personally contacted high-ranking Indian officials and India's national security advisor, strongly urging restraint and pushing them to calm things down before everything spiraled totally out of control. And for anyone still doubting whether Pakistan's nuclear facilities were actually hit, here's something that'll put those doubts to rest. Early on May 11th, the American Department of Energy aircraft, a highly specialized Beechcraft B-350, was spotted circling repeatedly over Pakistan. Now, if you aren't familiar with this aircraft, it was specifically used by the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, which is the exact agency responsible for nuclear security, nuclear threats, and radioactive emergencies. So the fact that this aircraft appeared so quickly strongly suggests India's airstrikes either directly hit nuclear warheads or at least damaged something critical enough to cause a radioactive leak. And if you're still not convinced, here's another piece of the evidence. Flight trackers soon spotted another strange aircraft, an Egyptian Air Force cargo plane suddenly flying straight into Pakistan, directly from China. Now, why on earth would an Egyptian military plane urgently rush into Pakistan immediately after India's strikes? Well, rumors suggest that it was arranged at the urgent request of the United States. Turns out, Egypt has a massive reserve of a very special element called boron, specifically boron-tin, in the Nile Delta region. Boron-tin is famous worldwide as one of the best materials to contain radioactive leaks or spills. India's decision to strike Pakistan's nuclear facility was a massive gamble. Some would even call it reckless. But at the same time, it might have actually been what prevented a much bigger disaster. Because after the strike, Pakistan was cornered and left with only two choices. Option 1, panic and fire off all remaining nukes, an act of desperate madness. Or option 2, step back, take a breath, and choose survival over suicide. Thankfully for everyone, Pakistan chose option 2. But what if they hadn't? What if Pakistan decided to retaliate with nuclear weapons? Well, we'd be looking at an absolute catastrophe, not just for India and Pakistan, but literally for everyone on this planet. I'm talking you, me, your grandma, your kids, and their kids' kids after that. Scientific studies repeatedly confirmed that even a relatively small nuclear exchange in South Asia would trigger global devastation almost immediately. Currently, both India and Pakistan have fewer than 200 nuclear warheads each. Compared to the thousands of warheads possessed by superpowers like the US or Russia, it might seem small, but it's more than enough to unleash absolute chaos worldwide. Within hours of the first nuclear explosions, massive firestorms would consume entire cities, ejecting millions of tons of smoke and soot deep into the atmosphere. Even conservative scientific studies show that between 50 million and 125 million people could die within the first few weeks alone. That's more human lives lost in just days than the entire toll from World War II. Cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad gone, reduced to ashes by massive firestorms and blasts. According to one frighteningly realistic simulation, a single 100-kiloton nuclear bomb exploding over a crowded urban area would instantly kill about 2 million people and severely injure another 1.5 million. Now, multiply this devastation by dozens of strikes. And remember, this is just the initial impact. Scientists call it the prompt effects. Realistically, the fallout, raging fires, and the total collapse of infrastructure would mean even greater death tolls. Once those mushroom clouds start arising, that's when the global nightmares truly begin. The intense fires from burning cities would eject between 5 to 36 million tons of black carbon soot straight into Earth's upper atmosphere. To put that into perspective, remember those catastrophic oil fires in Kuwait during the 1991 Gulf War? Those only pumped about 0.1 million tons of soot into the air. Yet it still darkened skies and polluted air across the entire region. Or the infamous volcanic eruption at Mount Tambora in 1815. That eruption shot around 10 to 30 million tons of volcanic ash and debris into the atmosphere, leading to the so-called year without a summer in 1816. Temperatures plunged worldwide. Crops failed across Europe and North America. People froze and starved, and summer felt like winter everywhere. The only difference this time would be that the volcanic ash eventually washed out with the rain and the snow, gradually clearing the skies. But nuclear soot? It's different. It rises so high, so far above the clouds that there's simply no rain up there to wash it down. Instead, it remains stuck in the stratosphere for years or even decades, acting like a massive global umbrella blocking sunlight across the entire planet. Within 2 weeks, all of that smoke would completely blanket our planet. Within days, Earth's temperatures would plunge drastically, plunging us straight into what scientists call a nuclear winter. Global temperatures would drop by 2 to 5 degrees Celsius almost overnight. In the weeks after, growing seasons would shrink drastically or vanish entirely. Rain patterns would collapse, harvests would fail, and agriculture worldwide would collapse. A peer-reviewed study in Nature Food in 2022 calculated that the nuclear winter caused by even a limited India-Pakistan nuclear war could slash global food production so drastically that up to 2 billion people would starve to death in the years following. That's more than a quarter of humanity. Even countries completely untouched by bombs would face unprecedented famine and economic collapse. Look, we don't even have to guess at this point. We've already seen exactly how horrific nuclear war really is, through an example of Japan. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy right on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. This single bomb had a devastating power equal to 15,000 tons of TNT, exploding simultaneously. In an instant, 70% of Hiroshima simply vanished. More than 80,000 people died instantly, vaporized by the blast. And by the end of 1945, that number climbed to over 140,000 people, who succumbed painfully to injuries, burns, and lethal radiation. 3 days later, the plutonium bomb Fat Man destroyed 6.7 square kilometers of Nagasaki and killed around 74,000 by year's end. Temperatures at ground zero soared to 4,000 degrees Celsius. Buildings literally melted, human flesh incinerated, and entire neighborhoods burst into flames. Even the rain afterwards was poisonous, a deadly black radioactive rain that spread contamination everywhere it touched. In Nagasaki alone, around 74,000 people were dead by the end of the year, bringing the total immediate death toll from these two bombs to more than 210,000 innocent lives. The instantaneous destruction shattered all infrastructure in the target zones. In Hiroshima, nearly all doctors and nurses were either killed or severely injured themselves, leaving only 3 hospitals barely functioning out of the original 45. Most victims had horrific burns and trauma. Medical response was nearly impossible. No response capacity remained for several hours because first responders themselves were among the dead. And even those who entered the cities later to help often succumbed to radiation sickness. One witness from Nagasaki recalled seeing people fleeing like ants, their bodies burned and hair standing on end, and mass cremations took place in the days after. The sheer scale of destruction and casualties in these two bombings shocked the world's conscience. Hiroshima became the first city destroyed by an atomic bomb, and Nagasaki the second, and, to date, the last. Yet the tragedy did not end with Japan's surrender. The effects of the bombings would persist for decades. The survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, known as the hibakusha, would face lifelong health struggles. Approximately 5 to 6 years after 1945, doctors observed a sharp rise in leukemia among survivors. About a decade later, other cancers, thyroid, breast, lung, started appearing at unusually high rates among survivors. The cancers took 10, 20, sometimes even 30 years to show up. The damage from the bomb's radiation was slow and relentless. It was like a poison that stayed hidden for decades, slowly destroying the DNA inside of survivors' bodies. Even pregnant women living near the blast site suffered miscarriages or gave birth to children with severe deformities, mental disabilities, and smaller than average heads. Even generations later, survivors and their families continue to live under the shadow of cancer risks and genetic mutations. The world has suddenly woken up to the fact that humans could now destroy themselves completely and quickly. In the decades after these bombings, we saw over 500 nuclear tests detonated above ground by various countries. Just to give you perspective, radioactive fallout from these tests started showing up everywhere, contaminating soil, rivers, oceans, and even ending up in children's teeth across the globe. By 1962 alone, there were a staggering 178 nuclear tests. The radioactive contamination was so horrifying that the entire world finally said, "Enough is enough. leading to the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, banning above-ground nuclear explosions. The only plus point from Japan is that nuclear weapons have become a global taboo. Ever since 1945, not a single country has dared to cross that line again, because Hiroshima and Nagasaki showed humanity exactly what happens when someone does. Anyone who uses nukes again would be immediately condemned worldwide, becoming as hated as the Axis powers were. And nobody wanted to be the country that broke this dark taboo and risked nuclear retaliation in return. Even during the Korean War, Vietnam, the Soviet War in Afghanistan, or Indo-Pakistan conflicts, even the most aggressive leaders debated nuclear use, but always backed down. No leader, no matter how ruthless, wanted to bear the responsibility of breaking that curse and becoming humanity's ultimate villain. For nearly 80 years, this fragile peace has held together mainly through a combination of moral restraint and a powerful fear of retaliation. But right now, the radicalism and instability coming out of Pakistan has reached a terrifying tipping point, leaving India, and frankly the entire world, on the razor's edge. And maybe that's exactly why India's recent precautionary strikes against Pakistan's nuclear facilities were absolutely necessary. Maybe these strikes have already saved us all from waking up to a horrific new reality. Look, no one can say for sure if this preventative action stopped a nuclear nightmare, but at least now, you and I both fully grasp just how high these stakes really are, and why this seemingly distant war, happening thousands of miles away, matters deeply to every single one of us watching. YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators. That is why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel, but if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel, or a faceless YouTube channel like this one, well, now's the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every day, and it's pushing newer, smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure many of you have questions on how to get started and how to grow a channel. We get questions in our email all the time from some of you guys. So that's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for the low price of completely free. So, if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or on the screen. Sign up now because, unfortunately, unlike YouTube videos, the bootcamp is like a Zoom call, so it's limited to just 100 people.